Live streaming is on.
Hello, welcome to the latest webinar organised by Undercurrent News along with Spheric Research. And today we're going to explore the topic of land-based salmon farming, but we're going to go specifically into the new technology which has emerged in the last few months, at least from an investor perspective, which is flow-through technology. And I've entitled this presentation, "Has Norway Reinvented the Wheel?" because this technology, it kind of evolved from older hatcheries in the salmon industry, but is a very modern and innovative way of increasing salmon supply. So I've got on the webinar with me Dag Sletmo of DNB Bank, Håkon Berg of Salmon Evolution, the CEO of Evolution, and Helge Krøgenes of Anfield Salmon. And these two are two of the most innovative companies in this space, with new projects to significantly increase salmon supply from Norway. The format we'll follow for this webinar, I'll briefly introduce the topic with a 10-minute presentation. And then we'll spend most of the hour, this is an hour-long webinar, and we'll spend most of the time talking among ourselves, about 20 minutes, and then we'll start to take questions from the outside audience. So if you would like to ask questions about this technology or these companies, please use the chat box in the webinar, and we'll try and address as many questions as possible. So I'm going to share my screen. Really, this will take no longer than 10 minutes, and I don't wish to keep anybody too long looking at my PowerPoint slides, and I'd much rather be talking to the industry, very interesting industry participants we have lined up today. So, has Norway reinvented the wheel? Well, the backdrop is that, COVID aside, the salmon industry from the supply side is having a very typical year. Supply is constrained. Norway, the largest producer in the world, will actually have quite a good year next year, producing as much as 2 to 5% growth increase. Chile is going to have a significant drop in supply on reduced smolt availability, and we're seeing very limited supply from other countries. And this is very much in trend with the previous years, where there's been the industry experts have talked about a structural supply deficit. And at the time when Asian countries are importing more salmon, this was expected to continue. And of course, this year with the coronavirus, we've seen the market change, but arguably only a short-term effect. Okay, so we have a new wave of land-based salmon farms, and the interest, as everybody in this industry knows, has been pretty intense. Even this year, investments continue to surge ahead. Well, most of this investments in these new farms will go into farms using recirculating aquaculture systems, where water can be recirculated, and the farms can be built really close to major urban centers. We've seen enormous interest in this technology. But at the same time, we've noticed how several projects have emerged in Norway to use actual flow-through technology or partially recirculating water, which is said to be easier to manage and operate than full-scale RAS. So this year, Spheric Research and Undercurrent News, we actually produced a database of all of the land-based farms and projects that we could find across the world. We spent more than a year looking at projects and tracking the flow. And interestingly, at least 16% of the tonnage that we identified in the future would actually come from either these flow-through or partially recirculating facilities. There are 62 projects in our database around the globe that if all of them hypothetically were developed, and that obviously is a big question mark, it would increase supply by 1.5 million tons. So all of these flow-through farms together could actually increase supply by more than 200,000 tons a year. And if you narrow this focus to Europe, it's an even bigger trend. At least a third of all land-based farming projects are flow-through, and they're all in Norway. So just a couple of the comparative advantages, although obviously we'll get a lot more context from the webinar. Producers say that this technology is easier to handle than RAS. Both of the companies that we're going to speak to today have identified, have attracted significant investor interest. They've successfully IPO'd on the Oslo Stock Exchange. It's very much a made in Norway trend, and but there is a limitation that it's suitable for coastal sites with suitable ocean temperatures. RAS still has the advantages that you can build plants very close to urban centers, and it still has that kind of label that it could actually improve the salmon industry's carbon footprint by reducing the necessity to air freight salmon to major markets. So just to focus in on our last slide with the two companies that we are going to speak to today. These companies have attracted strong interest from Norwegian and international investors. Very successful IPOs done in an extremely challenging year and with significant market cap already. And we expect other companies to follow as well. I mentioned Ekofisk, but there are several companies we've identified that are proposing this kind of technology. Some of the topics that we're going to tackle very shortly. Obviously, the technology, just like RAS, hasn't been proved at industrial scale. There are one or two partial recirculating projects that have been successful in Iceland. And then there are some high-tech solutions which are very interesting, but very innovative, and we haven't seen at industrial scale. And just on the regulatory framework, there is a question mark if authorities will continue to give licenses for these plants. So I will stop sharing and I take you to the participants today. And perhaps the best way to do this, if we just have everybody give a very brief presentation about perhaps just the background of the company and kind of where we're at the moment, and I'll just go around the panel. And Dag, I won't ask you where your project is at, but just perhaps a little overview of how you see things so far. So Helge, I'll start with you. If you could just briefly introduce Anfield Salmon and where you're at right now and how you see the market opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Anfield Salmon was founded in 2014 based on locations we have acquired on André, which is north of the Arctic Circle, picking up the currents from the Gulf Stream, which is tempered. And I started full-time working with the planning around 2016, where we have funded the project planning and financing stage. We got, as Matt said, the capital placement in February of 2019, where we actually got the funding to start building the first phase of phase one of the construction of the plant. We kind of say that we pick up we like to compare ourselves to traditional farming, where we have the benefits of land-based and we have the benefits of ocean-based fish farming. And the most benefits we see is that we can do it with low capex and a low opex, and we also have no sea lice, we have no algae, and we have no escape in our system. And also with regards to what you mentioned, Matt, in terms of the regulatory environment, we just had the Ministry of Fisheries visiting us, and they much favor what we are actually developing. So it's more a matter of tightening up the framework in order to declare what is in the ocean and what is on the land. And it's no doubt that what we are building is that it is in the bedrock, and our pools are actually placed on bedrock. The low OPEX comes from very little use of energy, as we have placed the pool below at the same level. The ocean, the level of water inside the pool is at the same level as the ocean, but we control the waste. We rinse all the waste and we take it out, so we don't let anything out in the ocean. And that's a few of the concerns from the ministry and the regulatory bodies, that you actually have control on your environment and your processing and your plant. We also have a big expansion possibility in that region of Norway, where we can grow out to production of between 90 to 100,000 tons with the land we have acquired.
That's great, thank you. And I'd be just curious to ask Helge, what do you see as the biggest challenge for Andfjord in project execution? One of the things that I wonder about, and actually we've had FinTech on one of our previous webinars, and one of the somebody who's very closely involved in the technology and the robotics. But I'd be keen to ask you about the robots that collect waste. I think that's a very innovative way of addressing the problem. I just wondered if you see that as one of the biggest challenges to make that work on an industrial scale, or if there's something more pressing or something else that you see as your biggest challenge to make this work.
So we were challenged early on that we wanted to build a square pool, and in order to have the robots work effectively with removing the waste, which is the feces from the fish mainly, is to have a laminar flow of water. And there we took out a patent on how to move the water through the pool in a straight line, so you don't have any back currents. And when we do that, the feces and the feed, which is not eaten, will go down to the bottom of the pool. And those robots we are using is actually traditional industrial standard robots, which has kind of a plow at the front, and it is concentrating the waste at the bottom, and then it feeds into a processing plant for the waste, which then converts it into fertilizers for the agriculture. So we don't let we let very little of the organic waste goes out in the ocean again, which is plus for this type of production. The other issue is, of course, the escape, which is sometimes is a problem out in the ocean, and for the salmon standard. So what are our challenges? Of course, it's always a challenge to produce biological products like we do, but we feel that we have a good handle on the fish welfare and also all other factors in the production of when we are opening up our production next summer. So
Great.
that's.
Thanks very much. That's brilliant. I'll just move along, and I just wanted to mention as well that if the audience would like to post any questions, please do so now, and we'll start to collect those and address them in the last half of the hour. Okay. Håkon, I would like to ask you now about Salmon Evolution, just kind of how it became a company and where you're at right now and how you see the challenge of producing this in this new system.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Salmon Evolution was established in 2017 and from a group of pioneers that have been in the traditional industry for 20, 30 years. And I think the main heart behind it was really what Matt was pointing out earlier, is just seeing that there's the global supply is really falling behind in terms of global demand. And at the same time, that is something that is kind of natural as the production has reached its more of the sustainable limit. And if we're supposed to keep up with supplying such a marvelous protein to the world, you need to develop new ways of doing it. And then the founders were thinking about land-based, and I think in that approach, you naturally think, should we build a ROS facility like many were already talking about in the post-smolt and even grow-out stages, or should we do something else? And I think the choice, as we're probably going to talk more about later, is really that in this discussion, I think the experience the founding team had with the salmon, which is a very valuable but at the same time a very fragile species, they made the decision that we are going to put biosecurity, fish health, and the kind of the environment in the tanks as our #1 priority, because that will ensure a healthy salmon, a growing salmon, and also at the end then also a profitable facility or a profitable company. And in that, I think that the choice was made to go through for partially a flow-through solution, what we call a hybrid flow-through system, which is basically based on the fact that when you recirculate water, you're adding complexity to your process when you're increasing your level of recirculation. And the industry has been doing land-based in the smolt side for decades. And the experience has really been that when you're recirculating above, say, 70%, saying that more than 70% of the water that you put into a tank at any given time is old water, so to say, then you're kind of entering the different thresholds where you really need to treat the water with complex elements. And below the 70% threshold, you're still kind of doing the same old water treatment operations that you have been doing for decades in the smolt segment. And then I think from my side, as I joined this company last year, coming from the private equity part of the aquaculture industry, I say that really our most important water treatment is that we constantly pump in fresh water all the time. And we've said about 35% fresh water, and then we recirculate the rest. And then we really stay below all the complex operations we need to do. And we're back to just adding oxygen. We're aerating for CO2. And we provide the salmon with extremely good conditions for good growth, low death rates, and also good fish health. And I think starting in Norway is something we're really proud to do. And we are now in the building phase of our first facility. We call it the phase 1 of our first facility, which is 8,000 ton per year production, which is 25% of the fully built out facility we're doing on the northwest coast of Norway. And from that, we have, of course, plans to take this international, both to Asia and other regions.
Right, that's really interesting. I'd be curious to ask you, would you say that the project was inspired more by the advances in RAS technology being used in the traditional salmon industry to grow post-smolt? Or I mean, also we've seen some of these projects in Iceland that use partially recirculating technology as well. Or would it be like a mixture of both of those technologies?
Yeah, I think if I understood your question right, I think the inspiration was really just the experience from the sea-based industry, where the challenges are significant on the lice treatment, on escapes, on high mortality, 18 to 20% per year. And I think the inspiration was really that there has to be more sustainable ways of farming this amazing product. And in that, I think, yes, we have seen in Norway various, and in industry also outside Norway, of course, RAS companies like Billund and Krøgenes and others that are building these facilities. Of course, they have built more and more facilities, and the learning curve has been definitely there. But at the same time, we see when we're talking about high quality and big size salmon, again being very fragile at high weights, I think the choice was really to just make this as natural as possible and just add in as much fresh water as possible, and then just accept the one limitation, which is we cannot build a facility like this in Utah or in the middle of Africa or in the Middle East, but there is definitely a lot of regions in the world where you can build them and still be very close to huge metropolitan area, both in Asia and in North America and also Europe.
That's great. Thanks very much. And I'll just I'll go over to Dag now, Dag Sletmo of DNB Bank. Once again, just another mention that, you know, please go ahead and fire questions at us. Okay, we'll be getting to that section pretty shortly. So Dag, my question to you is, one, I guess, do you see these projects making a meaningful difference to the very long-standing supply deficit that the salmon industry has had? And also, as well, a second question, if I may, why do you think these two companies have done well in attracting capital and going through the IPO process? And maybe just, you know, putting it into context with what Atlantic Sapphire has done as a RAS company, a pure RAS play, raising capital.
Our thinking is that, you know, land-based, independent of technology will, you know, it will make a meaningful contribution, but we don't think it will disrupt the global salmon market, say in terms of prices, etc. At least during the next 10 years. And the reason for that is that even if there are a lot of plants, the lead time is long, and you know, this is a market that we know has also a good underlying growth rate. So, you know, to some extent, the land-based farming will maybe take some of that growth rather than taking share from the existing farmers. And I think also, you know, these new initiatives can help support that long-term growth in demand, because, you know, when demand doesn't grow in a vacuum, you know, the reason demand grows is that, of course, the world population grows, but more importantly, you know, middle classes in emerging markets grow. When people get richer, they eat better, etc. It's better, you know, unbroken cold chains and retail distribution and all those things. But people can't, you know, demand a product they've never seen. So you need to introduce the product to new consumers in order to sort of turn the potential demand into real demand. So I think, you know, if we don't get an increase in supply over time, it will actually have a negative impact on that growth rate in demand. But, you know, if we think longer ahead in time than, say, 10 years, you know, then it could potentially be a disruptive force. We know the potential is huge if the code is broken, so to say. And then, will this be, RAS or, flow through or combinations of those? I think our thinking is that probably, RAS will be bigger at the end of the day because you can place it pretty much anywhere. But, as we have seen from these two companies, also is big potential in variations of flow through. And I think it's very interesting also that, this Korean shareholder in Salmon Evolution is planning to, also do this in Korea.
Right.
And then you had a second question. Why did these two companies attract capital? I think, one perspective could be that, if you do sort of pure RAS, you could argue, why should you do that in Norway when you can do it anywhere? It's more natural to be close to the end market. But, you can't do flow through anywhere. You need to have access to, coast line with a good and relevant water source. When you have these flow through systems, then you use, one of Norway's competitive advantages. And I think also the risk aspect is important, because I think, if you look at all these land-based projects, they all make a lot of sense on paper and in Excel, but the key thing is, will you be able to make the biology work? And, the flow-through systems, have a lower biological risks. I think that probably also is an important element. Right.
That's great. Thanks very much. Just actually, I think one follow-on question, Dag, is this year, and we're going to go a little bit off piste here, but this year, obviously, every single conference, industry experts such as yourself talked about salmon being in a structural supply shortage. Has the coronavirus situation changed that? Do you think that, obviously, we've seen this huge drop-off in demand from the food service sector, and at the same time, we've seen double-digit growth in retail, presumably as some consumers kind of try to start cooking at home. Do you think there's been a structural change in the demand scenario?
I think of COVID primarily as kind of like a speed bump in the road. And I think the industry has been quite impressive in how it's been able to shift massive volumes from food service to retail. I think, if you look at farmed salmon compared to some other seafood categories, it's also fared much better. So I would think, to the long-term implications, it could actually be positive, because now a lot of new consumers are being introduced to the product. They learn how to cook the product. They learn how to like the product. And that demand won't disappear, the day we have control over Corona and food service opens up again. So I think it can actually help fuel long-term demand in that context. And we're also seeing that, it has made food service more dynamic and better at, out deliveries, etc. And I think, another aspect which is interesting with the Corona is that, if you want to do important innovations through the entire value chain, that's important. That's difficult, because you get a lot of different companies to act at the same time. But I think when you get an event like Corona, you get a little bit of this impulse where you come to, 1, 2, 3, jump, and everybody jumps at the same time. And the relevance here would be, freezing technology. The freezing technology has become much better than it used to be. There's still this perception in the market that a fresh product is better than a frozen or previously frozen, which is not necessarily true anymore, which also opens up for, much cheaper transportation, because then you can use ships to some markets instead of airplanes. And that's, I think, also an interesting element within land-based farming, because obviously you do have a big advantage if you are land-based, say, in the US or in China, and your competition has to send a product on an airplane. But, if you can get market acceptance for previously frozen product, that dynamic changes radically. Right.
That's great. Because I think ultimately the question is, when we saw, pre-COVID-19, we saw Asian demand skyrocketing. South Korea, where Salmon Evolution is expanding, is a great example. And do you think that, and so the industry was sort of in consensus that this new supply would be very well absorbed by this market. Do you think that's still the case?
I think that, the only negative thing I would see from the corona beyond, the closing down of food service until we have control over this is sort of the food scare in China, where it seems that, all these stories about the fish having coronavirus, even if it's probably come from people touching the product, etc., and it's not really a way to get the disease. As long as the consumer fears it, it becomes a market reality. So, if those things will stick, that would be a negative. I assume that those things also, over time will normalize.
Right. Great. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to bring it back to the topic specifically of this flow-through technology. And I think, Håkon, I would just like to ask on this, this international element of your company. I've been to South Korea on a field trip. I spoke to a lot of companies that were interested in investing in supply, and demand was staggeringly high. I think it got to Japan levels. And I just kind of, if you could just address that market opportunity and maybe how you see it in 2020 to kind of build the same type of facility in that country, which I think at the time that the coastline, the issue they have is the summer ocean temperatures are just too warm. So there was companies looking at sinking cages and all this kind of stuff. So keen on your perspective there.
Yeah, I think a very interesting question, and our discussions with Dongwon, who entered as a shareholder in the summer, has been going on since late 2019, and we know they have been searching, and it's a huge global company, the 6th largest seafood company globally. They have been searching for a number of solutions to bring kind of salmon production, local supply to Korea. And you're totally right. I think the Korean market is growing with rapid numbers. Their love for salmon is very high. It's not a huge population, but it's a big population, and it has a very central location also to other close salmon-loving countries. And I think one of the aspects that you can do with the land-based facilities, you could take water from different levels, different depths, and even though the coastline is a little more shallow, some places in Korea, than what you see in Norway, I think a lot of the strength is found to take water from different depths, and when you have different depth levels, you could actually mix water to provide temperature that is acceptable. And then at the same time, there's of course potential to either heat or cool down the water, the last delta, so to say, to get what you would look for as the optimal temperature for salmon growth, which is normally considered to be around, say, 11, 12 degrees Celsius. And so when we are talking now with our owners and partners, Dongwon, about the project that we are in the planning phase of in Korea, that has been definitely one of the most important issues, is where do we locate to find the perfect water depth, water temperature, and also in terms of capex for reaching that. So
that's great. Thanks very much for your answer. So we're going to move on to the questions from the audience. There's several. I'm going to start with you, Helge, and there are a couple of questions specifically addressed to Andfjord. And I would also just encourage all of our panelists to look at the questions, and if you happen to want to address any of those. But one of the questions came from one of our listeners in Singapore. How many viable locations are there to expand the Anfield business model outside of the current location?
I would like to start with what you said, that RAS systems needs to be close to the market in order to have an advantage, right? And then we talked about transportation via air. We talked about the footprint, and it's important to add on to that metrics that when you get a water source, which is clean water, it's tempered, so you can without heating or cooling the water, you can bring the type of temperature the salmon likes in order to thrive and to be a good product. And if you look at the world maps, so to say, of course you have the Gulf Stream currents, which has mixed, which has on our side of the world is around 7 Celsius in the deep waters, and it's then an issue of actually accessing that water. I believe Håkon also touched base on that you can bring up water from different depths, and in that regard you actually need to be able to but if you are lifting, we did a calculation on our system. If we had placed that pool on top of the ground, you would have to, it would cost between 7 to 20 kroner per kilo salmon in order to produce, because of the energy you need to use to lift the water. And that's why you also need to have the technology and the method in order to pick up the water from kind of the same level as the ocean. And I believe that's the same what the ocean farms are doing, like Salma. They are building an ocean farm out in the Gulf currents, and they also do that because they get a flow through of the water and they get tempered water. So that's their method of actually accessing clean, fresh water, which gives a good biology and a good premium product for the market. So, and to be specific, I don't want to go into specific places, but there are, if you look at the world map and if you look at the Gulf currents, there are several places, of course, which are suitable for what we are doing. We can't do this in the Mediterranean because the amount of flow through we have in our pool is we replace 20,000 cubic meter of water every hour, and you can imagine trying to either cool or heat that water. That would be a huge energy bill in order to do that, and so that's why you are forced to actually use RAS systems when you want to place them in big population centers where you have warmer climate.
That's great, thank you. And I know that you've mentioned in conversation, the conversation we had previous to this webinar, that the actual the shape of the tank is very well. It's not a tank, but it's essentially an indoor pool, but it's very unique. And just I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, as there's one question on the shape of the tanks.
Yeah, that's an important question. My picture doesn't come up, but the edges on the pool is rounded, and that enables us to reach all parts of the pool with the robots, so they can clean it. And then it's square. It's 40 meters on one side, and it's 42 meters on the other side, and it's 20 meters deep. So, and again, you couldn't do this without that laminar flow, which is the patented method of actually moving the water through that. So it goes like a big Amazonas river in a way, from one side to the other, and then it goes out on the other side through the rinsing system of the waste and so forth. So,
right.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Dag. There's one question which I think maybe you would be the best one for this. So in the experience, there's potentially, if you look at the Norwegian coastline, there could, in theory, be a lot of these projects. Perhaps if you're Andfjord and you're just looking at areas where there's the Gulf Stream, then okay, you limit your options. But potentially there is huge potential space in Norwegian waters to increase supply. But I think your outlook is that it will evolve quite slowly. What do you see as being the constraint to growth here?
In general, the constraint for these, land-based in general, I would say is financing. But again, the financing, is related, of course, to the quality of the projects and the perceived risk. There is this regulatory debate that Helge mentioned a little bit. It's not completely clear to me what the real issue is there. But I guess if you look at the why do we have licenses for salmon farming in Norway in the first place? The real logic behind it is that, what one farmer does impacts the other farmer. There's so much carrying capacity in the water before you get too many, much disease and parasites, etc. So I guess, one key issue will be how clean is the water you let out again into the waters from a land-based facility. Because, you could argue that at some level, what's the difference between a flow-through facility on land and some kind of closed or semi-closed cage in the sea, which is also something people are working on. But if the authorities allow it and people find good locations, I guess there is room for a lot more. And we know the ambitions of both Anfield and Salmon Evolution, and they're quite meaningful volumes. I guess Anfield will be Norway's 4th largest salmon farmer based on if it realizes it's the plans it has currently.
Right, that's great. Håkon, I'm going to ask. There's a question on. There's a lot of technical questions. We're not going to have time to address all of them. I'd also encourage you all to have a look at the questions. If you wanted to address one in particular, please do so. One that I just looked at, to sterilize such a huge amount of water coming into your facility, what kind of challenge is that?
Yeah, very good question. And I think this really may lead to a more even earlier thought is why do we reuse some of the water? Why don't we do 100% flow through? And that is actually derived from this question. If we were supposed to sterilize 100% of the water, it would be an enormous both capex and actually opex to do so. So we have kind of limited the level of new water in to be really safe in terms of the complexity we do not want to add in our facility, and that leaves about 1/3 of the water that's pumped into a tank at any given time is fresh, and the way we would treat it is quite well known. It's number one, we would take the water from below the levels of lice and algae and parasites, which normally is operates in the upper 10-12 meters of the sea. We would take the water from down to 100 meters. So one water intake in 25, one in 100 meters. And then we would filter the water, and then we have a UV treatment of the water, which is very severe. And with the filter, we kind of take away the particles to make the UV real efficient. And then the question would be, okay, then the water is it too clean? So we have plans to have more of a probiotic treatment, which we add kind of good bacteria to the water in the operation.
Right, and I think you touched on capex and opex. One of the questions that we got was lower capex has been referenced for flow through versus RAS. What is the differential? So you probably partially touched on that, but maybe if you wanted to fully answer that question.
Yeah, I think this has a little bit to do, this is very individual. I could say one of the things that we have been doing is to spend capex to isolate each tank separately. So in our system, one tank is one biological zone. The water that enters one tank will never enter another tank. And that means that one generation or one fish group will never share water with another fish group. And where you will see in a ROS facility, normally there is a 6 and 6 tank together. which kind of increases the cause of an effect, because it will multiply from one tank. If there's a disease breakout or some negative water quality, it will multiply into 5 other tanks through the shared water. So I would say the CAPEX is very different, because this also has to do with geography. Norway is some of a high-cost country, but there are, of course, the biofilter, different pumps. There are different levels of water intake. And I wouldn't say that as a default that one is cheaper than the other. It has to do with all the individual choices you do as a farmer when you design your system.
Right, great. And so I'll do another question here for Helge, which is on, the question is actually addressed to both Anfield and Salmon Evolution. How do you manage pathogens, and especially viruses, coming from the seawater that would enter into your system?
Yeah, I can. What we have is there has been no farming, ocean-based farming at Andøya due to 12 or 13 wild salmon rivers. So there's a long distance to other farming, net pen farming locations out in the ocean. And also we get the water straight out in from the Atlantic. It comes around Andøya, so and we also pick up the water from either 30 in the summer or 160 meters in the winter in order to get tempered water. And at those depths, and we don't pick up the one thing we do, we don't pick up the water from the bottom. We have the intake lifted 10 meters up from the bottom in order to not bring in the bottom bacteria and pathogens which lives near the bottom. But other than that, we also have individual pools. All the pools are an individual environment for the salmon in each pool. And we can compare ours to a net pen system. They don't treat the water out in the ocean, and we clean the tank continuously all the time. So there is currently not perceived as any need of actually doing anything with the water. We do have reserve oxygen if when the fish gets up to 3.5 kilos, I believe it is, in order to have some extra oxygen when the fish in the pool gets bigger. We do plan to produce at about a little bit more than the number of fish per cubic meters of water. So we are up to 35 to 40 kilos of fish per cubic meters of water. Out in the ocean, it's a little bit less, and this is an average number. So we don't push the biology for the salmon to do it too tight, if you might say. I believe that some of the RAS systems, some of them produce at the double amount of fish per cubic meters of water. So,
right.
So all these different things and in addition, we have developed, or with the feed factories, a special feed which gives the fish a natural omega-3, and a robust feed which gives also a good fish health which gives a secure biology for the salmon. But of course, it is biology, and some things can happen, of course, in all these systems. But then we are individual pools for individual water source.
Great, thank you. Håkon, I was going to bring this question to you. A lot of the questions that we had actually on the previous webinar, and I'm pretty sure I saw one, maybe I didn't. But the taste issue was we did a webinar on that earlier, and we got a dozen questions on taste. So when we're talking about the flow-through system, partially recirculating system, what's your take on the taste of fish, the final product, versus a fish raised in the open ocean?
Yeah, this has been a very interesting discussion, and from my experience, the ROS companies have developed this kind of purging technology where they take the fish the last season, so to say, before slaughter, through a purging phase where they kind of cleanses some of this taste out of the fish, and from a flow-through system or the way what we call a hybrid system. This is not an issue at all, because again we're keeping the water quality and the water levels at so close to natural that the taste will not taste any different than what it does in a traditional sea-based farming. I think the understanding is really, again, when you are recirculating up to 99 point something %, you're consistently accumulating different levels of different elements that are they're not mortal, they don't kill the salmon maybe, but they are giving some kind of an off taste to the salmon because of the environment. And what they do in their purging phase is actually going into more of the hybrid solution, where they increase the level of new water to take out the off taste.
Great, thank you. Dag, how do you view this area of the final product? You know, DNB's been closely involved with Atlantic Sapphire. Atlantic Sapphire now have their products on the market, so they may have got real customer feedback on the US fish. So I just wondered how you would address your answer to that question on taste, both and flow-through.
It seems to me that people have learned how to deal with the off-taste problem. I think Atlantic Sapphire definitely has. It seems to me that Nordic Aqua Farms of Fredrikstad also have done so. At least the fish I bought from them in the store. But I guess this still is, like with many things in land-based farming, it's not necessarily common knowledge that you can buy off the shelf. That often each company need to learn these things themselves, and of course it's an advantage for the flow-through hybrid systems that they don't have to go through that step at all. Because of course for the market acceptance, you can't have that off taste. And you also, if you want to build a brand, etc., even if it's unlucky with every 10th batch or something, and suddenly you have it, that's not a good thing, even if generally you control it.
Right.
Can I add something, Matt?
Sure.
Yeah, because I think product quality is very important, and we have a partnership with Benchmark Genetics, who has a facility for broodstock built on the same technology that we have, and they take the broodstock up to 12-15 kilos to produce roe, and then in this process they take out fish on 5-6 kilos that are not needed, and we have been able to get some of that fish and really taste it and try it, and also send it to some of our potential customers, and the experience is really that the quality of the meat is extremely high, because the current in the tanks are really good. And it's almost like the fish has been on a treadmill the whole life. It's been standing and trimming in a good current, and the texture of the meat has been very good, and also the fat structure. And I think when you add that to a very good taste, we have every reason to believe that this should be a very, very good end product to bring to the market.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I did notice that we had a couple of questions come in on if this technology is actually suitable for other types of species. I'll put that question out to all of you, if anybody fancied or would like to address that. We had at least 2 or 3 questions on that.
I think definitely could be. I think one of the...
We have a very global...
A little lagging. So, yeah, I think... can you hear me? I think it
Yes,
can
yeah,
be.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things when you're building big facilities and you're of course investing quite a lot of money is this will be a production method that is maybe most suited for the say high value species that really can bring a very good return on the investment. And I think we have seen some kingfish. We have seen salmon, of course, as one of the most, say, high valuable, most industrialized species. And if we'll see more of this in tilapia or other species, I think the technology could make room for it. But if the finances approve it, I'm not sure.
Right. That's great. Yeah, I think we're up to 2 minutes to the end of the presentation. Just wondered if any of our panelists wanted to address any final question. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up here. Okay, no, that's great. I think we had a really interesting debate today. It was fascinating to learn about these new technologies. And again, if anybody had any follow-up questions, I'm sure we could get those questions channeled to the relevant parties. And I'll just also point out that this webinar is available as a recording, so it will be posted to the Undercurrent news channel quite shortly. And so finally, I would just like to thank the participants, Helge and Håkon and Dag. I thought it was a really great conversation. And just thanks very much for agreeing to be part of this panel, and really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Enjoy.